Happy New Year, happy 2021. Welcome to KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, doing my bit to make the ongoing pandemic palatable. Since I've gone through most of my short fiction in the first 90 episodes of KRAD COVID Readings, I'm going to be doing something a little different this year. We're cutting back to weekly, and it'll be Trek Tuesday, every Tuesday, where I will read an installment from one of my novelettes that I wrote for the Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers series. I wrote 10 different novelettes, or co-wrote in one case, novelettes for the S.C.E. series, which ran from 2000 until 2007. Or 2007. Or 2008, I forget. But yeah, we ran for, we did about 75 different stories. The series ran monthly. We debuted in 2000 with 3 ebook originals. In 2000. Yes, there were ebook originals in 2000. This was before the Kindle and before the Nook and before the Sony e-reader, but there were still ebooks. Ebooks go back to like the 90s. Originally, there were small companies that would like put a book on a disc for you so you could read it that way. It was meant primarily as it still is, as a saving storage and physical weight, since a disc takes up less space than this does. And then by 2000, people would read ebooks on their computers, possibly on their Palm Pilots. And in 2000, Microsoft launched the Microsoft e-reader. And they teamed up with Simon & Schuster to do the Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers series. And S.C.E. debuted, was created by myself and John J. Ordover, who was one of the 3 Star Trek editors at Simon & Schuster at the time. And we developed it, the team of a mobile team of engineers, as well as a cultural specialist, a linguist, computer specialists, structural systems, like different types of specialists who would travel around the galaxy, fixing the galaxy's problems, fixing stuff that was broken, basically. And we had a bunch of different characters who had appeared on episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation and Star Trek: Deep Space Nine. We had a couple different alien creatures who had appeared on the show, including one from the animated series, the little pill bug creature M3 Green. We gave that species a name, the NASAT. And one of them is on board. There's a Bynar on board. There's actually originally a couple of Bynars from the Next Gen episode 11001001. And we brought in, like I said, different characters. Sonia Gomez, who was the one who spilled hot chocolate on Captain Picard in the Next Generation episode Q Who. She's now a commander and in charge of the S.C.E. team. Duffy from the episode Hollow Pursuits. Dr. Elizabeth Lenz, who beat out Julian Bashir in med school. She was the valedictorian to his salutatorian. She's the chief medical officer. A bunch of other people, including the captain, David Gold, who was very much patterned after Sherman Potter from MASH. The 2 biggest templates for S.C.E. were MASH, in that it's a team of specialists who are not regular Starfleet, and the other would be Stargate SG-1. In the sense of the high adventure problem solving aspect of things. There's also a security chief. There's another engineer from Deep Space Nine from the Starship Down episode named Stevens, and bunch of other characters. It was a lot of fun doing the series. We did, like I said, about 75 novelettes that were all released as ebook originals at first. Which was not a thing really in 2000. I got to give Simon & Schuster credit; they were ahead of the curve on ebooks. They were taking up ebook rights to things before anybody else was. The Star Trek books all got put on ebook very quickly, and they're still, with 1 or 2 exceptions of some older books that they don't have electronic versions of. Every Star Trek book is available as an ebook and has been for quite some time. And in fact, it was so radical for them to do it that by the time 2007 rolled around, they decided to discontinue it because the sales weren't justifying it. And then, of course, 6 months after that, Amazon released the Kindle, and ebook suddenly took off. It was frustrating, but we got a whole bunch of stories out of it. Like I said, I'm really proud of the work we did. I got to work with a whole bunch of different people: David Mack, Dayton Warden, Kevin Dillmore, Christopher L. Bennett. Ilsa J. Bick, Phaedra Weldon, the late Dave Gallanter, and I'm forgetting everybody else I worked with, but I worked with a lot of people on this thing. Ian Edgington and Mike Collins, who else? Lauren L. Coleman and Randall Bills, Aaron Rosenberg, Christy Golden, Dean Wesley Smith. In fact, Dean, Christy, and I wrote the first 3 that launched it. The series launched in 2000 with the debut of the Microsoft e-reader. We didn't necessarily need to keep doing it after that, but we thought it was a cool idea, and it was a nice way to do more stories. And I was actually the editor in charge of it. Once John and I got the first 3 out, which was, like I said, there was The Belly of the Beast by Dean Wesley Smith, Fatal Error, which will be my first reading for our little Trek Tuesday thing here, and then Hard Crash by Christy Golden. Those 3 launched in the summer of 2000. In early 2001, Dayton Warden Kevin Dillmore did a 2-parter called Interphase. And then starting in, I think it was July of 2001, we launched the monthly series. And then every month after that, there was a new Star Trek S.C.E. book that people could get. It was very much like running a TV show when I was doing it, because we had to get a certain number of ebooks out. So anyway, like I said, for 2021, I've written 10 stories in the S.C.E. series. So I'm going to, each month will feature a different one of those stories, starting this month with Fatal Error. And I will read this one in 4 installments starting today, and then continuing to the 11th, the 18th, and the 25th of January will be the rest of them. And then after that, for February, I will read Cold Fusion. March and April, I will read the 2 parts of Invincible, which is actually a collaboration with David Mack, 2-part story. And then continue on from there with all the others that I've done. So, anyway, without further ado, here is the first KRAD COVID reading of 2021, Fatal Error, in the Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers series. Chapter 1. The holo in the center of Ansed's living room showed a comedy program that had stopped production a decade earlier, and for which Ansed owned no recordings. A minute ago, it had been showing archival footage of the landing of the Pevny ship that had colonized the 9th planet 50 years ago. A minute before that, it had been showing a real-time image of the weather on Hendorf Island. But for the life of her, Ansed, first speaker of Eerlik, could not get the holo to open a simple communications channel. That was only part of the problem. Ansed looked around the living room, currently illuminated by candles since the lights no longer worked, and out the window at the hailstorm that should have been stopped by the weather control system. She pulled the blanket around her teal shoulders with her short arms, necessary as the house's heating system was no longer functioning properly. The unthinkable had happened. The great Ganitriul was breaking down. And if someone didn't stop it from doing so, the entire fabric of Eerlik society would collapse. Suddenly, the staccato slamming of hail against the outside of Ansed's house ceased. She looked out the window to see that the storm had finally abated. There was no chance she'd be able to convince the holo to go to communications mode. She'd tried for hours to contact anyone she could, from her fellow speakers and priests who kept the knowledge of Ganitriul on planet, to the Pevny colony, or even the nearest Federation outpost off-planet. Nothing worked. The priority at this point was to consult the clergy. Ansed feared that even they could do nothing. After all, the transporters and spacefaring vessels were also operated via Ganitriul, so they probably weren't functioning any better than the weather control system, the heat, the holo, or the lights. Still, they were the experts. Left with no traditional method of speaking to the priests, Ansed was forced to go outside and walk to the temple. Ansed couldn't remember the last time she'd walked outside, nor the last time she'd gone from place to place in that manner. The necessity annoyed her, and the thought that the situation might continue was frightening. She almost bruised her forehead on the door, which did not open at her approach as it was supposed to. Sighing, Ansed opened a window. She had closed her living room window for the first time in years today. Usually there was a nice breeze coming in. Now, though, she had to use the window as a door. Clambering out, she was assaulted by the bitter cold. Since the construction of Ganitriul, long before Ansed's great-great-grandparents were born, the capital city had an even climate. She was forced to continue to huddle inside the blanket in order to stay warm, since she did not have proper clothing for this weather, and the clothes provider wasn't functioning any better than any other device. For 3 millennia, the computer on the moon had provided every creature comfort the Eerlik could want or need. Since Ganitriul's auto repair components had been installed a century ago, there had never even been a hint of a problem. Though tourists did make regular pilgrimages to the public parts of the caverns that housed Ganitriul's terminals, there had been no need for anyone to travel to the moon to effect repairs in 100 years. Until now. After an exhausting walk of almost 15 minutes, Ansett arrived at the temple. It was the only structure in the capital city that still retained the hideous Yarnalian architectural style, and Ansett had to admit to finding it painful to look at. But the priests insisted that the temple look as it had when it was first constructed, and Ansett could not blame them for that. Of course, the temple's greeter wasn't working properly. She wondered how she would be able to gain the attention of those inside. Then, noticing the ornate handle in the center of the door, she remembered that the temple still had one of those old-fashioned doors that opened manually. She could only hope it wasn't locked. First, she tried to slide the door to the side, the way normal doors worked, but it didn't budge. Then she pushed the door at the handle, but still it did not move. Pulling, however, seemed to work. Winded after all the walking and the effort of pulling the door open, Ansett took a moment to compose herself before entering the temple. "Is anyone here?" Her words echoed throughout the temple, which was almost pitch dark. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, Ansett thought. She considered turning back and going back home to try the hollow again. But she didn't fancy the idea of walking anymore, and damn it, she needed to talk to the priests. At least one of them had to be here. Suddenly, the lights in the temple came on, at about twice their usual intensity. Ansett's wide eyes were momentarily rendered useless by the sudden onslaught, and she blinked both her upper and lower eyelids furiously to clear the spots that now danced in front of her eyes. When her vision cleared, she screamed. Ansett was the foremost political personage on all of Eerlik, and she'd been a respected scholar and politician for years prior to that. She hadn't screamed since she was in her creche. But she screamed now. 17 priests and 20 acolytes served in the temple. In addition to their other spiritual duties, the priests were tasked with guarding all the knowledge that related to Ganitriul. If anyone would be able to solve the current crisis, it would be them. Right now, Ansett stared at a pile of corpses that seemed to number approximately 37, all wearing the robes of either priests or acolytes. They looked like they had been placed there in a semi-orderly pile. Blue blood was splattered all over the bodies and pooled on the floor around them. A shiver passed through Ansett that had nothing to do with the unnatural chill in the air. The numerous malfunctions were bad. This was worse. Ganitriul could, in theory, be fixed. But to have all the clergy dead... "Help me! Somebody please help me!" The voice seemed to come from amid the corpses. Ansett felt as if her short legs had grown roots. She couldn't move. Someone was obviously still alive in the midst of the carnage, but Ansett couldn't bring herself to investigate further. This was a task for enforcement, not the first speaker. "Help me, please," the voice said, this time much smaller. Ansett saw someone crawling out from under the pile of bodies. Somehow managing to overcome her fear and revulsion, Ansett made her feet move toward the voice and reached out one short arm to him. With a grateful expression on his face, at least Ansett assumed the expression was grateful, it was hard to tell under all the blood, the young man reached out to grab the offered arm. Now that she got a look at him, Ansett recognized the young man as Undlar, who had only just been ordained a month earlier. And now it seemed he was the only priest left. The recognition went both ways, as Undlar stumbled to his feet, gazed upon Ansett and said, First speaker? Is that you?" Ansett noticed that the young man had a very large gash all the way down his right arm, and dozens of cuts and abrasions all over his person. "Yes, Raker Undlar," she said. I came to speak to the clergy." With a sardonic tone that impressed Ansett, given Undlar's physical state, he said, I'm afraid that won't really be possible, First Speaker." "What happened?" Undlar seemed to deflate. "I wish I knew. The power went out. It went out, obviously. Something has gone wrong with the Great One. And then we were all assaulted, brutally. We tried to fight back, but our guns wouldn't work. They had some kind of edged weapons." That edged weapons had been used was obvious, given the types of wounds, but Ansett said nothing. We need to get you to a hospital. I hope their equipment is functioning, she did not say aloud. Unlar did not need to be reminded of that. And then we need to call enforcement. They probably have their hands full, but this is something that will need to be dealt with right away. I'm sorry, First Speaker, I failed. You did no such thing, Rager. On the contrary, you showed tremendous courage. And you may be the only hope we have, she thought. Saying that aloud was equally inadvisable. Supporting the young man, who started shaking as they began to walk, Anson moved back outside into the cold, hoping that the trip to the hospital wouldn't exhaust her. For thousands of years, Eerlik had prospered. There had been no reason to doubt that the golden age brought on by the construction of Ganitriul would ever end. Now the First Speaker of Eerlik had to wonder if that golden age was over, and if it was, whether the Eerlika could survive its ending. Chapter 2. Captain David Gold was dreaming of his wife's matzo ball soup when he was awakened by the duty officer of the bridge of the U.S.S. Vinci. There was an urgent message from S.C.E. Command. Gold blinked the sleep out of his eyes and said, "Screen on." The view screen in his quarters flickered to life, the first with the Starfleet logo, then with a familiar visage. "Did I wake you? Sorry about that, lad," said Captain Montgomery Scott. "Bloody time differences." Gold waved a hand dismissively. "Fact of life. I can give you a few minutes if you need it." Shaking his head, Gold said, "No need. Rachel's the one who needs 4 cups of tea to get going. When I'm up, I'm up." "Good. There's a wee bit of a crisis on a planet called Eerlik. You'll need to set a new course there right away." Without hesitating, Gold contacted the bridge and requested the course change with speed at warp 9. "How long will it take to get there?" he asked the duty officer. 14.5 hours at this speed, sir." "Good. Gold out." He turned back to the image of the head of the Starfleet Corps of Engineers. "So, you going to tell me what this is all about?" he asked with a small smile. Although Scotty wasn't biologically that much older than Gold himself, about 7 years, which at their age wasn't a significant difference, Scotty had in fact been born 81 years before Gold, which was the only reason Gold let him get away with referring to him as lad. Scotty had spent some 7.5 decades in a bizarre sort of suspended animation as a regenerating transporter pattern, until he'd been freed a few years previous. Scotty had done a fine job of whipping the S.C.Es into shape. After all, who better to supervise Starfleet Fix-It Squadron than the original miracle worker himself? In answer to Gold's question, Scotty said, "I'm sending you the full mission profile, but the short version is that Eerlik's in a right fix, and the S.C.E. needs to get him out of it." "They're not part of the Federation, are they?" "No, but we do trade with them. Turns out their entire bloody planet was run by one big sentient computer on their moon. The problem is the computer, they call it Ganitriul, whatever that means, is breaking down. The planet's in a state of chaos. The problem is they're completely cut off from the moon. Whatever bollock stuff's Ganitriul is keeping their transporters, comm systems, and ships from working right. In fact, we didn't know to get the distress call from Eerlik. We got it from Ganitriul itself." "Really?" Scotty nodded. "It knows it's broken, but it can't fix itself." Shaking his head, the older man said, "In my day, when we saw a planet that had been taken over by one of those... Nah, but that's neither here nor there. Your priority is to get the thing up and running pronto. No time to report to Starbase 505. Gold said, "But I've got crew to replace and one to drop off." I heard about the Bynars. Extend my sympathies to 110, will you?" "Of course. And we need a new computer specialist." He had been about to finish that sentence with the words "to replace 110 and 111, but that wouldn't be possible. They'd find someone to fill the position, but Gold doubted that he'd find anyone who could fill their shoes. Damn shame, too, he thought. The Bynar pairing wasn't even Starfleet. They were civilians, part of an exchange program, although they had agreed to abide by all Starfleet rules and regulations. Not wanting to dwell on the recent unpleasantness, Gold added with a sardonic grin, "Plus LaForge is itching to get back to the Enterprise. Nothing worse for a chief engineer than to be separated from his ship," Scotty said with a chuckle. "I understand the difficulties, lad, but Eerlik's whole bloody socioeconomic structure's collapsing. They cannot wait." "I know the drill, Scotty. When they put the funny-looking A on your chest, you dance where they tell you." "Aye, that you do. Oh, by the way, I took your advice. Had dinner with your wife last night. Lovely woman. Makes a fine matzo ball soup." Shaking his head, Gold chuckled. The universe is full of damn strange connections. For months, Gold's wife, Rabbi Rachel Gilman, the finest cook on the east coast of the Americas, had been bugging her husband to get the legend to come over for dinner. Returning the chuckle, Scotty said, "'Twas a lovely evening. I now know everything there is to know about your entire family. Oh, and your granddaughter's pregnant again." "You're kidding." Gold said. My great-grandfather again, he thought with a certain pride. She only found out yesterday, and Rachel asked me to pass it on. She really is a fine woman, lad. Pity she's all alone. Scotty had a slight twinkle in his eye, visible even on the view screen across the gulf of light years. Don't even think about it, Gold said with an amused glare. Otherwise I'll set her mother on you, and then you'll be sorry. Grinning, Scotty said, in any event, she really is a fine chef. You should convince her to make haggis. Sorry, she's a Jewish mother. She's only allowed to make edible food. Putting his hand over his heart, Scotty said with mock indignation, My dear lad, haggis is a delicacy. I refuse to accept culinary judgments from a man whose idea of a good drink is liquid peat bog. Lad, people who live in Slivovitz houses shouldn't throw stones. Shaking his head, Scotty said, in any event, I'll be off. The Sugihara will be in the area if you need any kind of backup. Good. Scott out. The screen went blank again. Computer, Gold said, leave messages for all personnel about the course change and let the S.C.E. crew know that there's a staff meeting at, he thought a moment, then finished, 0800. That left him with 3 more hours to sleep and would give everyone over 10 hours to prepare for the mission. Leave copies of the mission profile with Commander Gomez and Lieutenant Commander Duffy. And instruct Duffy to compile a computer report on Eerlik based on the profile. Acknowledged. He thought a moment, then added, also, let Lieutenant Commander LaForge know that he's welcome to sit in on that meeting. Acknowledged, the computer repeated. Within 3 seconds, David Gold had set his head on his pillow and was fast asleep again. A few seconds after that, he was dreaming of drinking a nice Slivovitz while white with his wife's soup. Or maybe it was scotch. 110 stared at the ceiling of the quarters that had, until recently, he had shared with the love of his life. For hours, he had been trying to imagine how he could possibly go on without 111. It was proving to be impossible. So was getting any rest. Bynar's only required a couple of hours of downtime per day, but every attempt 110 had made to try to offline had resulted in nightmares, where he relived those awful moments where 111 had died. Through their link, 110 had felt his bondmate's death. He was not sure if he would ever be able to rest soundly again. The Da Vinci computer then conveyed a message directly to him through his belt unit. 110 had never understood how the others could communicate with a computer by so clumsy a method as voice. According to the message, the Da Vinci had changed course to a planet called Eerlik, delaying their arrival at Starbase 505, and that there was a meeting of the S.C.E. staff at 0800. 110 doubted he would be welcome at that meeting. He could not stand to remain alone in his quarters any longer. For lack of anywhere better to go, he went to the mess hall. The Da Vinci was a Sabre-class ship. There were few places to relax outside one's quarters. The mess hall was really 110's only other option. His steps as he moved down the corridor were awkward. After spending all his life walking in tandem with another, walking alone was proving more difficult than he would have thought. Only one person was present in the mess hall, Bart Falwell. He was dictating quietly into a pad. 110 had been hoping to have the room to himself, but he found that he was grateful for the presence of the S.C.E.'s linguist and cryptography expert. Bart, the only alien 110 or 111 had ever met who came close to truly understanding the Bynar language, was a good person, and one that both Bynars had always felt comfortable talking to. Perhaps because he had made a study of how people talk to each other his life's work, he had an easier time communicating than others. Most aliens, at best, saw the Bynars as an odd curiosity. At worst, they were completely uncomfortable around them. As 110, he heard Bart say, "Love you, bye." Then he looked up and said, "Oh, hi, 110. Setting down the pad on top of a pile of papers, he asked, "Couldn't sleep?" "I have not been able to offline." He hesitated, then finished, "Since 111 died." He'd expected 111 to finish the sentence for him. That was perhaps the hardest thing of all to get used to. "I guess that isn't surprising, all things considered." Bart pointed to the chair opposite him as he himself got up and angled himself toward the replicator. "Have a seat. You want anything? I was going to get some coffee." "No, thank you. I have not eaten since 111 died either." Bart shook his head. "I'm really sorry, 110. I wish there was something I could say." He turned to the replicator. "Coffee, French roast. Half and half, no sugar." After Bart had retrieved his coffee, he sat back down. 110 had taken the seat opposite the linguist's. "Why are you up at this hour?" 110 wanted to cry. Every time he paused, he expected 111 to continue the sentence. "I'm usually up this early, actually. I'm a napper. I get snatches of sleep here and there. Starfleet doesn't always allow for that kind of luxury, but that's the nice thing about this ship, he said with a smile. I'm allowed my eccentricities. That must be beneficial. So, Bart asked after a pause, what are you going to do once we reach the starbase? 110 hesitated. Bynar custom is such that we must immediately rebond with another. If one of us dies and the other does not, we are designed to function in pairs. Designed? Frowning, 110 said. A poor choice of words. We are not genetically engineered. 110 knew that humans had had bad experiences with such things. Our evolution has taken us to the point where we function better in twos. 110 was proud of himself. He had gotten through that entire sentence, ironic given the subject matter, without hesitating. Bart blinked. Better? That's interesting. I always thought it was necessary for you to work in pairs. I was actually kind of worried when I heard we were taking this little diversion. Can you survive without her? In the literal sense, I can. Our effectiveness and ability to contribute to society is greatly lessened without a bondmate, however. 110 said easily enough. But then this had been indoctrinated into all Bynars from the moment they emerged from their birthing chambers. That is why we traditionally rebond. But you don't bond from birth. I mean, how can you... Bart cut himself off. I'm sorry, I'm being nosy. There does not appear to be anything amiss with your nose. Chuckling, Bart said, one of these days they'll design a universal translator that handles idioms. No, I mean, I'm asking a lot of probing questions. I do not object. In fact, I appreciate having someone to talk to. Perhaps you could advise me. About what? You are in a stable, loving relationship, yes? Bart smiled a bright smile. Very much so, yeah. What would you do if your bondmate died? Recoiling as if he had been slapped, Bart straightened in his chair. 110 realized he had committed a blunder. He tended to forget how little some aliens appreciated straightforward speech. Reaching a hand forward, 110 said, I am sorry if I have given offense. Bart shook his head. No. It's okay, really. I'm sorry. I just wasn't expecting that question. Though I guess I should have. He took a sip of his coffee. The honest truth is, I haven't the first clue what I do. It's funny, if you add it up mathematically, I've spent more of my time without a mate than with one. We don't even get to spend that much time together, what with Starfleet and all, but I tell you, I can't imagine being alone. 110 leaned forward. Really? So you do understand? I had assumed that others did not comprehend or share our total devotion to each other. Well, I can't speak for other races, but, humans may not have bonded pairs on the same level as you guys, but we can get pretty silly about each other, Bart said with a chuckle. Our experiences led us to think otherwise. Commander Gomez and Lieutenant Commander Duffy, for example. Bart rolled his eyes. Yeah, well, I don't know what the story is with those two. But if something did happen to your mate, would you rebond? Find another to love? Blowing out a breath, Bart said, I don't know. I wasn't looking for a relationship when we met. It just sort of happened. So I suppose it could happen again, but I doubt I'd be in any kind of rush to get involved with someone else. And I seriously doubt I could find anyone as wonderful. The problem is, 110 hesitated. What he was about to say would shock his fellow Bynars to their very cores. I am not sure that I wish to rebond. Shrugging as he took another sip of coffee, Bart said, So don't. You do not understand. We must rebond. Hold off. You just said that it wasn't necessary. Biologically, it is not. Culturally is a different matter altogether. If I do not rebond, I will be considered an outcast from Bynar society. I will lose my name and be deleted from the master file. But the alternative is even more difficult for me to contemplate. Like you, I cannot imagine my life without 111. I would rather die than bond with another. Tensing somewhat, Bart said, You're not thinking about... Remembering that this was another subject about which humans were touchy, 110 quickly said, No, I am not contemplating suicide. This was not entirely truthful. 110 had wanted very much to die with 111 at the end, rather than have to endure without her. But he hadn't been given a choice. And now, truly, the idea of killing himself was not one he was comfortable with. But at the time, he continued, From the perspective of my people, if I do not rebond, I will be dead. I do not know if I am ready for that. But I also know I cannot bond with another, at least not now. I will not sully 111's memory that way. That is why I wish your advice. Bart started to take another sip of coffee, then noticed that the mug was empty. You know, there are few sensations more annoying than trying to take a sip of coffee when there's no coffee in the mug. He got up and ordered another from the replicator, then sat back down. You are stalling, 110 said impatiently. If there was one aspect of dealing with aliens that had always irritated 110, it was their inability to move at anything like a reasonable speed. Bad enough that they naturally move too slow, but then to compound it with intentional delay. Sorry, it's just... I don't know how to advise you. But if it means anything, 110, no matter what you do, you've got my support. 110 found himself smiling for the first time since 111's death. Thank you, Bart. That means a great deal to me. Well, I'm glad that this new mission isn't going to be a problem. Heck, maybe the extra time will help you sort things out. I hope so. I wonder what the mission is. Bart shrugged and sipped his coffee. Well, they'll tell us at the meeting. I do not believe I should attend it. I do not believe that Commander Gomez will still want me on the team in my diminished state. Don't be silly. Of course you should be at the meeting. You're still one of us. Let Gomez make the decision about the team. That's her job. Nothing CEOs hate more than their subordinates anticipating them. 110 had not thought of that. I will accept your advice. Thank you. Grinning broadly once again, Bart said, My pleasure. Unfortunately, 110 did not feel any more settled with this decision made. He was quite sure that Commander Gomez would not want him. After all, of what possible use was a single Bynar? To be continued next week. I forgot to mention about Scotty. Yes, Scotty is a supporting character here. We couldn't do the Starfleet Corps of Engineers without Scotty, and he was still around in the 24th century, so it gave us an opportunity to use him as the guy who basically doles out the mission assignments and runs things back on Earth. This will be continued next week, where I'll pick up with 3 more chapters. And please check me out online, DeCandido.net, DeCandido.wordpress.com, Patreon.com/KRAD. Lots of cool stuff in all those places. And I will see you next week, and please stay safe.